Aled and Alison are from the BBC. They were talking strategies, digital strategies. Now, Aled, you're head of programming at BBC Radio 1. I mean, you're one of the market leaders when it comes to what you do on social. What's the driving force behind all that?
Wow. Well,
No soft questions here at Radiodays.
I think it's less about just what we do on social. It's more about the content that we have and the fact that content, we're very gifted, obviously, at Radio 1. We get a lot of the big names. We have a lot of fantastic people who work on that content. And then when we have the content, we have a strong radio team, a strong social team, and a strong visual team who then make sure it's right for their platform. So it's all working together, but at the same time, making sure that each platform has its strengths.
But it's not an afterthought like it is in a lot of stations when you have a really good bit of radio and then you say, oh, how do we repurpose this? I get the impression that when you come up with an idea, you start from the beginning and say, well, how are we going to make this for social and for radio?
And that's how it used to be until we've noticed that a couple of years ago and said no longer can it just be the radio producer that books a guest or does a game and we turn the cameras on, film it and put it and point to it on social.
And hope for the best.
Well, exactly. Yeah. It needs to be. There are people who are only going to consume Radio 1 on social, and there will be people who will only know of Radio 1 through the live lounges on YouTube, and they need to be as good as they can. The stage we're now at is just to work out how we can tell those people what we have to offer on radio, so start bringing them through to the live listen again and growing those numbers.
And how is it changing? Because I read, and correct me if I'm wrong, that last year for the first time ever in the UK, commercial listenership outgrew the BBC's listenership. So do you find that Radio 1's audience are now interacting more on social than they are even on FM?
Radio 1 actually grew last year. So young audiences, under 35, which is such a difficult audience to have, we increased by 800,000. How many of those listened to Radio 1? So our strategies are working.
And they're old-fashioned listeners, sitting down listening to the radio.
That's people consuming our linear output, whether that's through the app or through the car, FM, DAB. They are contributing to the listen. So there are lots of things we're doing for that. Having strong social channels and strong video content is going to help.
And how much does that help? Alison will tell us. So Alison, everyone wants to be more social, be more digital. How does it affect listenership? Do we know?
Well, we've been doing some research on that recently in the BBC. I think what we'd seen, the background to that is that all of our radio brands have been active in a whole host of digital spaces, regardless of the format, regardless of the audience, and we thought there's probably a better, sort of more efficient, effective way of using digital. So we set about looking at what digital was doing for us, and that includes social media or any of the digital non-linear touch points like podcasts and the website. And just as a sort of a headline from what we found, it wasn't really driving time spent with our brands, but it did have the potential to bring in new listeners, especially in social media. Aled was describing how they've got a sort of way of working in Radio 1 now that's about stumblers, falling over your content in social media third-party spaces, trying to make them into seekers who then want to consume you in our own spaces, whether that's live or our own digital spaces like the website. And what we found was that social media has a really strong role to play in moving people along sort of that funnel from being aware of a station to consuming and ultimately being an advocate for your station. It's a great place to bump into people and change their minds about what your station is about.
That's an interesting one, stumble across the brand. So gone are the days maybe when people will tune the dial just to get Radio 1, whereas they might come across a Radio 1 video that was shared by a friend, by another friend, by another friend.
Exactly. And one of the interesting things for us as well, it was outside this research, but something we've been thinking a lot about, is how important it is to drive attribution for your brand. I think especially if we take an example like YouTube, so Radio 1 is the most successful station on YouTube. I know a lot of other radio stations are active in that environment, but as Aled described it earlier, there's often this sort of rabbit warren adventure that people go on there where they might be chasing content from Taylor Swift, for example, and your brand is one of the providers who offers that content. How do you make your brand stand out? And that's all about attribution and encouraging them to come back.
We all do that. We go onto YouTube to watch a serious documentary about World War II and we end up watching a cat on a skateboard or something like that. Well, listen, guys, well done and thank you so much.
Thank you very much.